Hi, welcome to the Plastic Pressgang podcast, a podcast about playing historicals in a very relaxed way. My name is Calvin, I use he, him pronouns, and I am, surprisingly, not the reason this is late.
And I'm Eric, I use he, him pronouns as well, and I am absolutely the reason this is late.
Sorry about that, y'all. Life happens. We get things happening. Eric has been
not home for more than a consecutive week at a time since August.
Yeah. So, you get what you pay for. Sorry. But yeah, welcome back. We've made it again. And figure we're just gonna hop right in and talk about what we've been working on since the last time we talked.
So before we do that, I have another thing that's Eric's fault that was pointed out by a listener in our 30 Years War episode, where I incorrectly identified which Reich is which. That's hard to say. We said that the First Reich was the Roman Empire, the Second Reich was the Holy Roman Empire, and the Third Reich was the baddies. That is actually not correct. The First Reich is the Holy Roman Empire. The Second Reich is Kaiser Wilhelm and Otto von Bismarck's little thing in the 1800s, and the Third Reich, still the baddies.
Yeah. Although the Second Reich also kind of baddies, but that's because Otto von Bismarck and Hindenburg were a bunch of proto-fascist dickheads.
True, but less the comic book baddies.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right, so back on to hobby progress.
Eric, what's your hobby progress?
Absolutely nothing. That's not actually true, but it's pretty darn close to true. I have been aspirationally hoping to hobby. I have gotten a little bit of things done. We are looking at doing some Cold War Goes Hot related projects and content, and so for that I bought a bunch of models for Team Yankee, though we're not going to necessarily use them for Team Yankee, mostly some Danes and some Swedes, which is exciting. As usual, when I get super busy, what I actually do is sort of optimistically shop for projects in the future, so I can tell myself that when these models arrive, I will have free time. Given I recently also won our club's Pile of Shame / Closet of Opportunity competition, this is not actually a workable system, but it is mine. So I've been working on that. I have been doing some experimenting with 3D printing at 15mm scales for aforementioned projects. So figuring out which sort of models scale down well, what settings to use, when to switch to a resin printer at that particular scale, because it's a different decision, and so some stuff like that. So I've been making a little bit of hobby progress, but not a huge amount, and most of it's just laying groundwork.
Okay. Here's where I have to crack out the list. So, the last podcast we had, I spoke that I was working on stream with my sharp practice French army. Well, that's done now. Also done is my Agincourt English for Lion Rampant, and a French army for the Franco-Prussian War, using Rebels and Patriots, or Eagles of Empire, or Sharp Practice, whatever we wanted to use for that. I got... What else did I get done? Oh, I started work on some Cowboys. I started work on a British force for the American War of Independence. I got the first 6 models done there. I finished the Soviets for 7 Days to the River Rhine / Team Yankee, which there's quite a number of them. I did a test model for some like modern special forces for something eventually. I finished a small gift that I need to give to Eric that will eventually make its way over to him, along with some SAS and Long Range Desert Group for the Northern Desert. Specifically, they're the models from the new Desert Raid, along with some of the recent Soldiers of Fortune from Warlord, and some of their Jeeps that they have for the Desert SAS. So I've painted 1 or 2 things.
Yeah, so that's usually how this segment goes.
Oh, and also I started a Russian Napoleonic army got started.
Because Calvin makes good life choices.
That was a birthday gift.
We have, however, made some progress with the club in focusing that energy a little bit, which we're going to talk about for games we're looking at / working on. Because we have a new member of the club who's interested in historicals, wisely knows he can't keep up with Calvin, and so we have decided to focus a little bit on stuff right now that is, as far as I'm aware, mostly the 15mm genre, looking at Push of Pike, which is the 30 Years War, but tiny, based off the Pike and Shot rule set. And then also 7 Days to the River Rhine, which is a game, essentially, as far as I can tell, designed to solve the Team Yankee parking lot problem by taking the same scale as Team Yankee, on the same size board as Team Yankee, and then increasing the points involved in the game by like an order of magnitude. So that having, I have 8 tanks in my army is a like grotesquely large army for this, and actually more unworkable than is probably a good idea, and I will probably cut that in half for most games. To just space things out a bit so that you don't get like 4 Abrams pressed front to back in some sort of Abrams centipede driving down a road. So looking forward to both of those games, partially because I hear, though I have no experience with, 15mm being relatively easy to paint. My experience with smaller scale models is Adeptus Titanicus, which is the opposite of easy to paint. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I can confirm that fact in that 15mm is super easy to paint. I think I busted out most of the Soviets that I did were like
nice.
Done in like a single 4-hour painting session.
Yeah.
Because it's paint them green. You're done. Congratulations.
I also did manage to get, and whether or not this is a historicals game is probably a discussion for another podcast episode. I did, with another buddy at the club, play a lot of, I am now blanking on the name.
Are you talking about the Silver Bayonet with Rob?
Yes, Silver Bayonet. We played a lot of Silver Bayonet, and that game is amazing, and we will talk about it more in a later episode because Silver Bayonet is amazing.
Especially since I've had several listeners poke me and say, hey, we want to hear about Silver Bayonet.
Yeah, we may move that up the list because seriously, I cannot say enough good things about that game.
Yeah, or just generally like, the alternate historical / vaguely historical games. Because that's the other thing is I painted a lot of models for Gloom Trench is what they're originally from. I'm planning on using them for Last War, but they were extraordinarily fun to paint up, and I suppose we'll talk about that at a later date, along with our idea of doing, Silver Bayonet, but Pike and Shot era.
Yeah.
Oh, and I did order What a Cowboy, so...
Because you're a monster who must be stopped.
That, I can paint 10 models and order a rulebook, it's fine.
Yes, but then I have to paint 10 models and order a rulebook.
No, you don't. You realize, for that game, you need, 4 dudes.
Okay, well then I have to paint 4 models, which still is asking a lot right now.
No, you can use mine.
No,
having 10 will be enough.
Gotta have my own cowboys. This is a particular issue of mine.
You're making this your problem by yourself.
I have created for me is my reticence to both use other people's models and my reticence to do commission painting. Both of these problems entirely me related problems. I admit that. But speaking of doing things on the Pike and Shot era. What are we actually talking about today, Calvin?
So today we're actually doing a nice deep look at one of the games that we've talked about before, talked about a lot, and one that we actually played fairly recently before we did this for this reason. And that is the game Pikeman's Lament by Daniel Mersey. So the TLDR at the top is this game rips.
Yeah, this is a really good game.
But you want some more info than that.
So I think the key to know about Pikeman's Lament is it is one game in a sort of constellation of games by the same designer who has happened across a very good mechanic and just rolled with it. So if you play Lion Rampant, Dragon Rampant, The Men Who Would Be Kings, Pikeman's Lament, you're playing in broad strokes a similar game. In this case, this is the not just 30 Years War, but I think it is most appropriately the Pike and Shot era is the sort of broad genre for it. We play it at 28mm. I think you could probably get away with playing it at 15mm on a smaller board, and that could be fun.
I know lots of groups do it at 10mm, just to do larger games where it's just oh look, this block of guys is a unit, kind of thing. Yeah.
And this is, I think, in the genre of what you'd call a big skirmish game. So you're talking about units that act as units. You are talking about not necessarily keeping track of individual models, save your commander. but at the same time, you don't have very many models. This can definitely be played in a night, and still have time to do some other stuff that night. So I think it's in that sort of category that I'd put it in, where you're not committing to a massive game, but it's not quite a skirmish game in the style where if you say skirmish game, a lot of people picture, 10 individual dudes moving around versus like, no, this is a block of Pike and it's got a bunch of people in it.
Yeah. So the big thing that runs most of Daniel Mersey's games, and specifically Pikeman's Lament, is this whole kind of idea of pushing your luck with these unit activations, where to do a thing with a unit, you have to roll a certain number on 2d6. Some things are easier to do than others. For example, I can't shoot my cannon. This is normal.
Yeah, so you have units are generally speaking good at a thing and are fairly willing to do that thing. So for example, a unit of shot is usually pretty straightforward to get to shoot, and much harder if you're like, hey, you should charge those dudes. In contrast, a unit of like Galloper heavy cavalry, very eager to move, very eager to charge, not interested in doing a whole lot else. And so that's the sort of mechanic. And importantly, as you try your activations, if you fail, you're done. That is how the turn switches between players. That I think is a really interesting and fairly dynamic system. It does inject some tactics into what is a fairly simple sort of mechanic, because while you've set up a nice charge where like Calvin's got a pike block, I'm going to shoot it with one unit of musketeers, then shoot it with another unit of musketeers, and then I'm going to close from the flanks with both of my cavalry units. That might not happen. And it might not happen at all. Pieces of it could happen. I could get the shot units to shoot, and then the cavalry will be like, nah, we're good. And so there's a lot of trying to figure out how to position yourself in a way where if you fail, are you okay? And I think that's one of the things I have found I really like in war games at this point that 40K has sort of lost, is the ability to fail and planning for how to fail. So that's the sort of unit activation mechanic that drives the whole engine. Then when you're talking about most opposed rolls, you have a very simple sort of dice pool mechanic where if your unit is at full strength, you roll 12 dice. If your unit is half strength, you roll 6 dice, and you're rolling against a target number. So for example, a commanded shot unit, which I use a lot of, which we'll talk about in a bit, their target number to shoot is a 5-up. So you roll 12 dice, you see how many of those are 5 or more, and then you compare that against the stamina of the unit you're shooting at. So if you're shooting at, again, another unit of commanded shot, they're pretty weak. So they've got a stamina of 1, I think it's 2 if they're being shot at. So you say, okay, I've got 3 5s in my pool. You have a stamina of 2. So 2 of those dice kill one of your dudes, and the third one's wasted. You can then thus get very durable units who have a stamina of, say, 3 or 4, where you're not necessarily going to lose a lot of people, and 2 of those units sort of running into each other is often something of a slog, and often largely going to be determined more by morale than actually I killed the dude. So yeah, that's the basic mechanic.
Yeah. Another thing is, do you want to touch on later, like the few slight changes we make to it?
Yeah, let's touch on that a little bit later once we have gone through what we like about it, etc. I will edit the outline while you talk next, so that we remember to do that.
Sounds good. So one of the big things is like kind of what do we really enjoy the most about this game? One of them is that the system is insanely straightforward. I think we probably had like one game of us learning it, and then by game 2 we were like ready to party, ready to go, barely looking at the book except to remember, wait, what is that exact number that we need to roll?
Yeah. For the most part, my consultation of the rulebook is choosing a mission at the beginning, me forgetting the stats of my units, which is embarrassing because I only have like 3 types, and then the occasional weird edge case where we have to figure out like, okay, what happens if 2 units of cavalry both tied and then retreated? What does that mean? Things like that.
What happens
next? But for the most part, It's a very easy system. As Calvin put it in the notes, it occupies that Blood Bowl brain space of like, I just want to meet up with a friend, roll some dice, have fun, have cool things happen that aren't expected because it's a dice game, and go from there. And it's a really nice system to do that. It's relaxing. It's just a fun game.
Also, another piece of the Blood Bowl brain space in there is the way you think about your turn, where it's like, oh, what are the easiest things that I can do first? It's that idea of going, oh, these are the ones that I'm more likely to do. I'll do those first, and then move on throughout to the more, longer shot things as you go. Another thing that I really like about this that we may want to touch more on later is the fact that there is a very solid campaign system just in the base rules. Just like with your character that you choose at the start of the game, your commander traits, like it's very heavily built into the system, which is, I think, a really interesting thing to play with.
Yeah, I really enjoy that.
And also, the missions are refreshingly simple.
The missions are really nice. I think both of us, this is tagged rant about esports missions, and I think that's a fair thing. Both of us are at this point in our hobby journeys a little bit tired of the plan how you score secondary points for a given opponent, given a given army. Thinking about that. A lot of the missions in here are fairly straightforward. They're often asymmetrical, and they often have objectives that if you focus on the objectives, you can potentially do quite well, even if you're losing dudes left and right. So a very good example of that is the game we played to evaluate this game for right before this, to sort of have it fresh in our minds as we wrote the notes for this, which was a game where my Swedes were ambushing Calvin's army while he was asleep. That is a very asymmetrical mission. Calvin starts in the middle of the board. His units wake up randomly. If I manage to set fire to a building before the unit that's in it wakes up, they all die, etc., etc. But in exchange, Calvin's army started with a bunch of Pike units formed up all together, which is sort of awkward, and I had to come to him. So there's sort of some nice asymmetry there. I ended up, if we discount special orders, winning. We'll come to that later. And if we don't discount special orders, losing by 1. But that was largely...
I think we tied.
Yeah, I think we might have tied. But regardless, I was losing that game if you just looked at the units. I had both of my cavalry units mangled. My commander was dragged off the field, badly wounded. Things were not going well for me.
After a duel, which was fun.
But 3 of the 4 buildings I was supposed to be raiding were on fire. And that was mostly what I was supposed to be doing. So the missions are really great for that. Another thing I really like about it is, and this is a combination of a little bit the system and a little bit the period, is there are no faction rules. There's no oh, you're playing the Polish, this is what you get. There are just units. There are 3 types of cavalry, 2 types of shots, arguably 3 if you would count the Forlorn Hope, a couple types of units of infantry, and cannons. And that's pretty much it. And so you can really make a force sort of fit your play style, whatever you want. Since this was all German mercenaries anyway, you can articulate how that came about really easily. And so there's a lot of flexibility there. And that also comes with a nice sort of segue to how you do this for hobbying, which is that you get to use the vast range of models that exist for 30 Years' War and English Civil War, which we talked a little bit about during the 30 Years' War episode. But there are a ton of models out there that are really characterful that you can use, and just use a little bit of them and sort of splash them in, because it's not a very big game. And so that's one of the reasons I'm particularly fond of it.
I'm looking at some bloody miniatures to add as extra pieces, my Forlorn Hope, or potentially as other commander figures that I can throw around in places. Because right now, I'll save this for probably later when we start talking about our actual forces, but I've got some fun things coming up for that.
Yeah. All right, so that we've talked about what we like about this game. What is it we don't like about this game?
And this is a weird one, because this is like, we gripe about specific rules in the thing is what we don't like about it. Like, there's nothing that's like structural.
Yeah, the game as a whole, there's nothing we don't like. There are very specific rules that either we don't like because they don't work with how we work, or that we think are genuine sort of problems. So Calvin, you want to touch on the first one? Because I don't think this is a problem because it benefits me.
Yeah. So one is wild charge, which is just a thing that says, hey, these guys are going to charge or want to charge before anything else happens. It makes them like hit harder, all that kind of fun stuff, but also it gives you a slightly different thing to worry about. But also it's a 0-point upgrade to make them better and to make the cavalry do what they want to do anyway. I don't think that should be a free.
Yeah, I think the key to wild charge is that wild charge units go first, which is, awkward. And also, let's just look it up. So generally speaking, what you're doing is you're taking something that gives you wild charge along with another rule. So for example, for gallopers, which is what I use this on, aggressive gallopers are a 0-point upgrade that makes their attack value better. And then when they're within attack range, you must text to activate a charge. But if you fail that, it doesn't end your turn. So it gives you sort of a chance to activate to make sure they're doing what they're doing, because generally speaking, if you have gallopers and they're within range of an enemy, they're gonna want to go. And it's a 0-point upgrade. Both of us have found it's pretty strong for that. This is one of those things where, like, if you see something that's going to break the game, just walk on by. You can make an army entirely of, like, elite aggressive gallopers, and that's going to be real annoying for your opponent to fight. And it costs nothing more than just standard elite cavalry. So it's one of those things where, like, yes, technically the issue is you can bait units. So, like, Calvin can put a unit of Pike up front and be like, sure, you have to wild charge.
Go ahead. Here's a formed unit of Pike. Have fun with that.
Yeah, like single tier. But like in exchange, there are ways to mitigate that. So my commander rolled for his very first roll, probably the best trait for him to ever have, which is his unit can just opt out of wild charging even though they have it. So they can be like, no, it's cool, we're good. Yeah, so it's a completely free upgrade at that point. And I think it's really either taking wild charge en masse, because you can't possibly bait all of your enemy's cavalry so that they're all bad charges, or the combination of that with that commander trait that makes it really quite good. The next one is one that bites me in the ass all the time, which is there are what are called special orders, which is you can declare that in addition to the objectives of the game, you are going to do extra cool stuff. And these come in 3, 2, and 1 honor versions. So 1 honor is, if you make it, you get 1 honor, which is the sort of campaign system for keeping track of how cool you are. And if you fail them, you lose 1 honor. So this is, so the 1 honor special orders are things like, you have to make the first attack. Your officer has to issue a challenge. All of your units have to make at least 1 attack. So you can set up an army where these are fairly achievable, but I still have trouble with them. 2 honor ones, which are a little bit steeper, are things like you have to kill or rout more enemy units than you lose. You have to kill more units with attacks than shooting. You have to destroy 2 enemies in 1 turn. And then 3 honor special orders, which are sort of go big or go home. You have to kill the enemy officer in a duel or attack. My favorite one is quote, draw no more than your handkerchief from your pocket. Your officer's unit may not attack or shoot at another unit or itself be attacked. Which is really, really hard to do. But you can do it. Or like rout or kill 12 points in 1 turn, which is just basically like almost table your opponent in a single turn. I have experimented with these. These are optional. You don't have to take them. I very rarely have these work out in my favor. So personally, I have largely started trying to restrain myself from taking these.
Yeah, and even me, like when I take them, I take like 1 or 2 of the 1 honor ones. Like, I never have gone super hard into them, so they've never bitten me as hard. But I can see how they sometimes just do not work, or it's just like, oh, I took this and then things went badly.
Yeah,
I'm fucked now in the campaign.
I think it's things where, like, especially if you think about even a one honor order like charge, which one of your units must declare the game's first attack. That'll work real well as long as the activation system cooperates. And the activation system is not known for cooperating. So this is actually, I don't think this is a bad rule. I think this adds a lot of flavor. I think you can build whole armies around special orders. Like if you want to do like a polished winged hussars unit where like literally all of your dudes are just elite cavalry. Take the special order where all of your units attack, because that will probably happen. But there are definitely some of those that are either difficult or you're just like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So yeah, that's one that I struggle with a little bit. And then we're going to talk about the one that benefits Calvin a little bit more. So Calvin, do you want to talk about units with very high stamina?
So, some of the units have like base 3 stamina. Some of the bigger ones, like I think it's elite gallopers, have 4. So you have to have 4 successes on whatever dice you're rolling on these attacks, shots, whatever, to kill one. This doesn't seem like that big of a deal until you realize most of the numbers are like, at best, a 3-up on 12 dice. So it's like, cool, you kill 2 guys in a turn. And then they start doing things like, oh, now I'm behind a wall. Oh, that adds 1 to my stamina. Now I'm at 5 stamina. And all of a sudden you need 5 successes on, if they're behind a wall, you're probably shooting at them, 5 ups. And it's like, cool, so I'm just never touching that unit ever again because they've got just so much stamina. And you never think, it's not going to be that big of a difference between 4 and 5. That can't be too much of a difference. Until you think about it, if you rolled all 12 successes, if they're stamina 4, you kill 3. If there's stamina 5, you can only ever kill 2 models at all, period, on any attacks, doing the best you can do. And so we have kind of made ourselves kind of an informal errata of stamina can't go above 4, just to make things a little bit easier for everyone, so they don't have to deal with these like monstrous units you can't dig out of cover, period.
Yeah, there was a couple games we had where for example, both elite gallopers are stamina 4. Forlorn Hope is stamina 3, and they're pretty easy to get into cover because they're a small infantry unit. So there's some things that are really dug in where, like, if you have night fighting, that may increase your stamina by 1 and things like that. And there's something very demoralizing about rolling, like, especially the shooting units, because historically in this area shooting isn't all that great. So you're targeting 5 ups, you roll your dice, you get 3 5-ups, and that does you nothing. And you're just like, cool, next. And these units often also have very good morale, so it's not as if, oh, but if you get that one through, they're gonna panic and break. So yeah, we've amended that to you can't go above stamina 4. I could see for a special scenario or something wanting to waive that, but it is a thing that we cap it at just because we both found it to be really demoralizing to consistently not be able to do anything over an entire turn. Where like, no, I have poured literally everything into this unit and it's fine. Is somewhat difficult to sort of take in good stride for a game that's supposed to be fairly casual.
Yeah. But once again, overall, the way we think about the game is like everything structural about the game is totally fine, totally awesome. It's like, we've gone through 3 things that are very specific.
Yeah, and these are all nitpicks. Like, you could successfully play this game and both not really encounter these things or be like, no, I think it's fine. Like I said, I think the special orders system is fine. I'm just not good at it. And that is, yeah, because what happens is I start imagining what would happen if I nail that 3 honor objective, and then I don't do it. And then I'm like, oh cool, well I won, but I got no honor for that because I said I was gonna kill your dude and I didn't. And so like all of these are, and similarly like big stamina units, really we're only talking about a couple units in also special circumstances. So this unit and in cover, or this unit and in cover and it's nighttime. So like it doesn't actually come up a huge amount. So, assuming that our very small problems with this game haven't turned you off, because they shouldn't have, because this game is great. Calvin, if I wanted to start this, where do I start? Where do I buy my models?
I mean, the easy button is you poke, you click on over and you go, Battalion Starter Box. Yes, please. Click that. You've got 2 armies for anything, essentially, in the era.
Yeah.
That's the quick and easy way to do it. Pretty much the starter box, either that or the To Kill a King box, if you also think you might want to try Pike and Shot later.
Yeah. So that's really, I think that the answer is, as with a lot of historicals games, especially, this is part of the Osprey Blue Book series, which are fairly small, sort of inherently beer and pretzels-y games that are, I want to say 96 pages or 64 pages. It's one of those.
64, I think.
64 pages. These are small games, and they're miniatures agnostic in the sense that Osprey isn't going to make miniatures for these. So the Warlord plastic sets, if they're an era where they're making plastic sets for you, are a great way to get started, because like the Battalion box set is supposed to be able to make you a battalion. Pikeman's Lament is about a company. Companies are smaller than battalions. And then you can supplement that a little bit. So like, for example, you can order one of the cavalry related starter sets and have more cavalry than you're ever going to need.
Or you can be me and buy cannons.
Yes, or buy cannon, or supplement with some cool looking Forlorn Hope dudes. There's a lot of things you can then do from there where you can sprinkle that in. So for example, I've got some dragoons that are also from Warlord. I ordered most of my stuff from Warlord, but again, there's stuff from Perry. There's really characterful models from a lot of different manufacturers. So like, I've got some skirmishers who are, I think, also from Perry, but there's a number of different manufacturers that make little things. So I ordered, I think from, I want to say Empress, like another officer, because I wanted an officer who looked different in case my officer dies, which he tries to do literally every game. So like there's a lot of stuff like that that is very easy to get started, but really the best way I think for you and your friend to get started is, as Calvin said, either the Battalion starter set, which will give you enough just plastic dudes, or the To Kill a King set, which will give you plastic dudes and a rule.
Another thing I'll point out is we talk about mainly playing this game in 30 Years War, English Civil War, Italian Wars if you want to get spicy and pick up like the Land's Neck box, which I did. Another idea you could think of is, hey, you know what Sengoku period warfare was? Lots of guys with pointy sticks, lots of guys with guns, guys on horses, guys with big swords. You know what this game does really well? Warfare with those. So if you want to get spicy, pick up the Samurai Army starter box from Warlord, and all of a sudden you've got 2 armies for that. I kind of want to do that, honestly, because I think it'd be really cool.
Yeah, there's definitely ways to do that. It's a good way to explore basically any war of the period where it is still viable to stab a guy rather than just shoot him. And you can go a lot. The examples in this go all the way up to the Great Northern War, where you can start talking about There are rules in here for when we figure out that you can attach a bayonet to a musket. So there's a lot of flexibility here. We're talking about this primarily in the context of 30 Years' War because that's how we're playing it. This also works for the English Civil War. So
if our rant about it in episode 2 didn't put you
if
off.
that didn't put you off and you're playing the English Civil War, or if you're an English listener and thus you are playing the English Civil War because it is, as far as I can tell, what everyone on your island plays, this works perfectly well for the English Civil War. It's the same damn units. It is often the same damn people. So you can definitely get away with it.
Looking at you, Scott.
And we talk more about this in the 30 Years' War episode for a lot of things like that. I think this is also a great game, as we mentioned, the sort of narrative perspective on a lot of the scenarios. This is a great game for model-based objectives. So we have a couple sort of crates of supplies that I 3D printed. I have bought because it was on sale at some point. Warlord has a Barnyard Animals set. There is definitely a cattle raid scenario in here. They have, I think I ordered from Empress Miniatures a wagon, and some like wounded people and a signpost. There's tons of potential here for really evocative, narrative objective markers.
I am looking at picking up some of the bloody miniatures, like the more civilian-looking models.
Yeah.
And having those as like objectives for us to use. Like, I don't know, the Witchfinder General set.
Yeah.
Be cool. Would be fun.
That is the other thing, is in the game you can either purchase, or there is occasionally a good thing that happens where you get, an experienced sergeant or a preacher or someone like that, where you can have really character for models where, your pikemen are now being led by some, Protestant firebrand who's yelling about Calvinist doctrine as they advance. There's lots of potential there for modeling, where, because it's that sort of big skirmish feel, you can have some of those really characterful dudes in a backdrop of, then there's like 15.
Yeah. But anyway, now that we've kind of ranted on about where you can go, what do we have? I have actually 2 different units, or I guess armies for this game. The first one is my classic... Actually, let's go chronological order. First, the old one is I've got my Italian Wars Landsnecks hanging out, which they are an elite Pike unit of 12 dudes with my commander, a normal unit of Pike dudes, a unit of shot, a aggressive Forlorn Hope, which replaces their, guns and grenades for gnarly melee weapons, in this case, great swords, Zweihanders, because I'm playing Landsnecks, I gotta. And then, because I'm me, I have an Italian mercenary named Giuseppe with a very large cannon, who shoots more often than Ivan does, which is funny. And that's who we played the last game we did before this. They were the ones who got attacked while they were in quarters and managed to beat off the Swedes. And then there's also my normal 30 Years' War army, which is a bunch of tired Imperial German soldiers, where I've got a normal pike block, a unit of shot, another aggressive Forlorn Hope. This time they're dismounted cavalrymen with pistols and swords and a petard, and a cannon, because I like cannons. And this one specifically is a Russian mercenary named Ivan and his cannon Svetlana, who will shoot when Svetlana wants to shoot. And
spoiler, Svetlana does not want to shoot very much.
No, but Ivan likes punching cavalrymen.
Yes, Ivan has developed a extremely frustrating reputation for being able to repel cavalry charges, which no artillery unit should be able to do, and yet I will occasionally charge that cannon and lose 2 dudes, which is just egregious.
Once again, we joked about doing a 0 point or 1 point upgrade that's just Ivan, where it's the cannon will not shoot as often, but they've got a real gnarly melee score.
Yeah, +1 to fight, -1 to, well, I guess since it's It's the other way around because it would be activations. So it would be -1 to your fight activation and like +1 to shoot or something like that. Because Ivan is egregious and a monster. So my force, which we have alluded to a little bit, was designed around the idea of a sort of Swedish raiding or reconnaissance force. So it's got 2 units of what are called gallopers, which is heavy cavalry that is intended to charge. One of them is elite, aggressive, and has my commander in it. Those are the hard boys. And then the other one is none of those things, and so is sort of a flanking unit. I have 2 units of what is called commanded shot, which is the Swedes would put shot units sort of intermixed with their cavalry that were supposed to support them. So these are sort of skirmishing musket-armed troops. The nice part about them is one of their special abilities is when they're charged, they can shoot and then retreat. And indeed they can do that in their normal activation. It's slightly easier to just shoot, but if you accept that it's a little harder to activate, you can shoot and then move, or move and then shoot, which gives them some mobility. In exchange, they're extremely fragile. I've got 2 units of those. A unit of dragoons, which is a mounted musket unit that has basically those same abilities. And that's it. So it's a...
Well, specifically, your commanded shot are elite commanded
Yes.
shot.
One of the things I think is sort of mandatory for commanded shot and dragoons is making them elite, because we talked about that target number. For the non-elite versions of those, if you move and then shoot, that target number is 6, which realistically means you're not gonna do anything when you do that, because the expectation when rolling 12 dice is you'll get 2 results, which is enough to kill very few things where you're actually worried about them attacking you. So I think bumping that up to 5 is sort of mandatory, and they work really well. My dragoons particularly are a menace. So we do have that on here. I think now that we've sort of gone through both forces, Calvin, what is your standout unit?
So in the few games I've played with them, I still think the real standout unit is Aggressive Forlorn Hope. Those 6 guys will absolutely murder face anything they run into. Even like if they get charged by heavy cavalry, they've got a pretty good chance of coming out pretty alright. It's just 6 guys running around on foot, and I mean, you actively avoid them when we play. Like, you actively go out of your way to stay out of the area where they are in, which is kind of a win for me either way. Either you come in there and we duke it out, or you stay away from there and I just can have a wing to myself with them.
Yeah. And again, as mentioned, that is a 0-point upgrade. It's wildly good.
The one downside is it takes away their shooting value, but
their shooting value, which is genuinely pretty good. But it's hard to get. They're a hard unit.
It makes them stamina 4 too.
Yeah,
which is
it makes them stamina 4. Their attack value becomes 3, so they are as good as elite gallopers. And they're tough. Like, charging them is not a trivial thing. I am very curious because we have not played with aggressive Forlorn Hope. So either just regular Forlorn Hope or veteran Forlorn Hope who are better at shooting. I'm curious as to how they work, because I think that could potentially, those units could be very nasty in sort of defensive play.
Well, one thing about veteran Forlorn Hope is that's 6 dudes that become a third of your army.
Yeah, they're very expensive. However, in cover, their stamina 4 use their normal attack and defense values, hit on a 4-up for shooting, and have an 18-inch range, which is nasty. So I think it's an alternate. We talked a little bit about potentially a unit like that. If you're really interested in artillery, one of the effects your officer has is that he makes activations slightly easier. Both Calvin and I struggle with the fact that our officers are in frontline units, and so are often out of range of things that need some help with activations, like, say, cannons. We have talked a little bit about what if you tucked an officer in a unit of Veteran Forlorn Hope, and sort of built a cannon and shot unit that's nevertheless still pretty hard to root out of some cover as a sort of mechanism. But as Calvin alluded to, that's like probably half to 2/3 of your army at this point. So my standout unit is actually not my aggressive elite gallopers, because they're sort of hard countered by this nonsense Forlorn Hope unit, but my dragoons, who are a unit of veteran dragoons, and they are very good at getting objectives. They're stamina 3, so for a shooting unit, they're pretty durable. They are good at shooting. They can sort of deliver firepower wherever I need them to be. They're good at objectives, and the ability to, with a degree of reliability, get out of the way when charged and have caused some casualties in that process is incredibly valuable. I have in a couple games sort of slowly devoured one of Calvin's units by
normally my cavalry.
Normally his cavalry, because the Forlorn Hope, generally speaking, I have tried to deal with by that point. But Calvin has a cavalry unit, or this also works for, Pike or units like that, where as they try to advance, you try to retreat, and that works pretty well. The one thing they don't stand up very well to is a proper shot unit. Just because there's a lot of bullets headed your way with those.
Or when a cannon actually does shoot.
Yes, or when a cannon actually does shoot. Basically, they don't like getting shot at. And they are absolutely garbage if they get attacked. But again, the idea is between being able to move 12 inches and potentially being able to move half their movement if they get charged, that will get them out of the way of most things if you're paying attention. So yeah, those are definitely, I think, my standout unit. That is the one where Calvin is like, you have to get these guys painted. And I agree with him.
Yeah. Like, come on, man. I want to see them done because they're kicking my ass.
Which is fair.
And then if you want more information about where to get models, cool characters to play from, general history of these conflicts we're talking about, we did a whole episode about it. Check out episode 2, which is, I believe, labeled as By God, That's Wallenstein's Music.
It is indeed. Okay. So we had sort of alluded to this, and a lot of games, when you play them, are one-offs. My army fights your army, we fight it out, and that's the end of it. And then the next battle is entirely fresh and as if we have never seen each other before. This system has a campaign play option that is, in my mind, absolutely how you should play this game. Calvin, you want to go through it a bit?
All of Daniel Mersey's games. All of Daniel Mersey's games have this, and yeah, it's just so well integrated into the game itself. Like, you always choose, like, at the start of the game, like, cool, your officer, Hans von Langenschlangen, whatever. You go, oh, cool, I have this guy. Then you have to roll a trait for him. This could be, oh, he's a drunkard. Oh, he's, a hard man who likes throwing, who's really good at close combat. Oh, he's an old man who might know a thing or two, but also is more likely to get got. Which both our guys are. They're two old men who should not be
who should not still be in this war, and yet are.
Yeah. And it's really well integrated in, where it's like, oh, for completing objectives, you get honor for your guys. And this honor lets you improve your guys' stats when they reach certain levels, and they get, promoted, and they get, a new trait, like, I might be now, able to restrain my guys from a wild charge, or I'm able to, or I get, this actually happened a couple times with my officer, is, you received more honor for being promoted. Congratulations, you are now promoted again. which is just kind of interesting because there's also a point where it's, oh, you've been promoted so much, you've been promoted to lead a battalion, make a new officer. So it's got a nice way out of the campaign for these like superpowered characters you make, which is a really interesting thing to me.
Yeah, so some things I really like about this system is there's not a lot of bookkeeping. That is one thing that sort of drains, I think, a lot of campaign systems is, keeping track of if each one of these units has X many, other units they've routed, they get thing. It's not that. It's entirely centered on your commander, which does give you the excuse to buy a sort of flamboyant-looking general model. One of the things I do genuinely love is that there's a successful end to your officer's career, which is if they get 61 honor, they are promoted to colonel, and they go command a full regiment, and that is a different game. So you still have to make a new officer, because your current officer has been promoted and is now in charge of a full regiment, and then at the same time you can die when you are attacked. So whenever you have two units go together and casualties are inflicted, you roll 2 dice to see if what there's called a lucky blow, which is where this did indeed impact your commander. Our guys, because they are both old men, this is, instead of just double ones, it's any combination of 1 and a 2, which makes it much more likely. It's not likely, but it's much more likely. And then you find out what happens when your officer is a casualty. And that can be anything from they have a wild escapade and, outwit their opponents and end up getting extra honor, to they die in a field, and that's the end of it. They're done. Or that, you lose a trait, you're wounded. For the most part, I've found that there's not a huge amount of consequence to this, but there's definitely a potential for just like, yep, your officer died because it's the 30 Years' War and it's terrible. And I think this makes for really good sort of framing a campaign as the rivalry between two officers commanding small units. So in our case, Calvin and Hans versus now I believe currently Captain Skarsgård. Yeah,
both the guys are captains, I think.
So and part of the thing is, like, I'm genuinely sort of hoping my guy makes it to being promoted to a colonel, and I'm then going to, in Push of Pike, I'm going to have a Colonel Skarsgård who is commanding one of the regiments. So I think it's a really good for sort of narrative, building things out of it, and having this sort of, the 30 Years' War, for a lot of it, were not big set-piece battles, but sort of just like horrible skirmishes as two armies come close to each other.
60 guys killing each other in a field next to a house.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of potential room for that, and so I like that the campaign is built in. It is clearly assumed to be the default way to play the game, and it is also not so powerful that if my guy finally gets murked and I re-roll an ensign, that's not going to wildly change how my army works. Calvin's got a little bit of an advantage now, but not a lot of one, and not one that can't be overcome pretty readily. So yeah, I think it's a nice system, it's a clean system, and it's fairly light, and I really like that, because it lets you tell the story of a particular dude.
Yeah, and it's also, like, it's got just enough of a roleplay element in it to make you invested in your dude.
Yeah. Like, yeah. If Captain Skarsgård catches a bullet, I will be sad.
I mean, I would be too, honestly.
Yeah, so maybe you should stop attacking him with Forlorn Hope.
I mean, they're not shooting him. They're just trying to cut him into small bits.
True.
Anyway, another thing we've talked about is kind of the scale of the game. where we talk about it a lot, like, oh, we've got 50-ish guys aside, 24 points is what they normally use. But I know some people, especially when they start doing it like 10 mil scale, they triple the size of things, and they play like Pikeman's Lament, but big version. We have some opinions on that.
Yeah, so in the rulebook, because I just ran across this, the author talks about bumping unit sizes up to like 30 from 24, which is basically get another unit, 2 units if they're cheap. That makes perfect sense to me. Bigger than that,
bumping it to 50 points.
Yeah, bumping it to 50 points or 60 points or something like that. The problem is inherently, because you're using the activation system, you will run out of activations. Essentially, this is the inherent part of this. If you think about this as a coin flip, if you flip a coin once, you have a 50% chance of activating. If you flip that coin again, you have a 50% chance of activating, etc., etc. You're eventually going to fail that. And with more units, you're inevitably not going to get to a bunch of your units. And I think the issue with that is if you sort of take the rules as written and use it with that particular mechanism, whole parts of your army are essentially going to get neglected, because Calvin mentioned the sort of Blood Bowl mentality of figuring out either what are the easy things to do or what are the important things to do. Like, X has to happen, so I need to do it first, because otherwise I run the risk of it not getting done because somebody else failed to do their thing. And so what will happen, I think, with big units and big games is whole parts of your army will end up being neglected for most of the game. And so, like, as you are far away, you will prioritize shooting, and then you'll be like, oh crap, I need to get my cavalry going. So we have thought a little bit about how to deal with this problem. Calvin, you want to tackle the first one?
So, one idea we had was that units with heroes, the rabble rouser, the experienced sergeant, they can act on their own. Kind of like, it's a 1-point upgrade that says, hey, they can roll to do something. Like, so even if you fail your other stuff, they can still try to do stuff on their own. This I do kind of like. For example, if I look at one of Daniel Mersey's other games, actually that's a different solution entirely that I think is interesting. So we'll wait for that until after we do the feeling multiple attachments thing. But it gives you a reason to take these 1-point upgrades that are otherwise just like, oh, +1 to morale. It's like, or, this could also give you the ability to use that unit more effectively. Like,
yeah, and I think this would be a good way to position units to make sure that they can do things, but would still be a problem. Like, so if you fail your activations and can't activate anymore, but your one unit with a junior officer can still do things, that somewhat mitigates the end of the activation thing. But odds are you still have other parts of your army that you want to activate. And if you go the other way and sort of go whole hog and be like, my army is immune to worrying about failing activations, you're probably playing down at least a unit. And so I think that's a workable solution. I think it's one that integrates easily with the current rules. And then I think does very nicely give you a reason to buy these little 1-point characters who I have found I have never really wished I had one in my unit when I didn't.
Well, I mean, the only way we've dealt with them is we get one occasionally on the good things happen table.
Yeah. But like I've never been like, oh man, you know what would have turned this game around is if I had a sergeant with this unit. Whereas I think genuinely, if you're like, no, but my dragoons could always do their thing because I paid for this, that would potentially be worth taking. So the other solution, which I'll talk about for a bit, and then we'll touch on Calvin's mysterious third solution, is playing this game as if it is actually just a multiplayer game. Also, you're playing multiple armies as one big army. So essentially each roughly 24 to 30 point detachment, say figure out how much you actively want to play. So if we say it's 50, split that in half, or let there be a little bit of flex between them, but say, okay, this is a 25 point army with an officer. Roll up that officer. Take a second detachment. Say this is a 25 point army. Roll it up as a second officer. And you're essentially playing multiple armies so that when you fail your activation, that is the end of that detachment's activations, not the army's activations. So you could go through, everything that Captain Skarsgård does, and then when he finally fails, switch over to, Captain Erickson and do all their stuff. This is a little bit more cumbersome, in my opinion. But in fairness, you're playing a big game. It does allow for some of that failed activation bad vibes to come in still, because like one of your detachments just sitting there picking its nose is not great. But it's probably, I think, one of the easier ways to just adapt things. There is a question there with then, do you want to designate an overall commander and somehow make them better? Be like, okay, but like what there actually is a captain and an ensign, and the captain gets an additional something in addition to normally what they have. I don't actually think that that's necessary. And you can just represent this as like, because you have examples all over history where like two captains who don't really talk to each other end up on the same battlefield and like don't coordinate their actions at all. So I don't think you actually have to do that. I think historically you probably shouldn't. But I think if you want to keep that sort of campaign play, this is about a hero, I could see designating an overall force commander and giving them some sort of minor little boost.
Yeah.
So Calvin, what's your third idea?
So this is actually me pulling from another one of Daniel Mersey's titles, The Men Who Would Be Kings. In there, certain units have a certain thing where it's like, oh, the regular infantry, the redcoats, whatever you may have an ability where it's like, oh, if they fail their activation, they can still do X action. For the regular infantry, it's, oh, they can shoot. For the irregular infantry, it's like, oh, they can move, or they can go to ground, things like that. Where it's like, oh, even if you fail, you still get to do this thing. And I think that would be an interesting thing to do for, like, the various units, where it's like, oh, shot, if they fail their activation, or if they, you fail your activation totally, they can still do shooting if they want. Or like, oh, the cavalry can still move if they, don't get the activation or they fail. So essentially, it's giving them something they can always do without having to worry about, like, rolling for it or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think that's potentially a really decent sort of adaptation. I think that would take a little bit of thought between you and your opponent about what those default traits are. Because, like, the example, like,
yeah,
shot is really obvious that the answer should be, by default, they shoot. Except that's also really good. Versus, like, if you're saying, like, okay, but cavalry can always move. So I think it would take some thought there in terms of, okay, but do we have a balance? Because, for our units, like, if you say commanded shot can always shoot, and shot can always shoot, okay, cool. That's evened out. Yeah, both of our armies have actually exactly the same points in units that can do a decent thing. And then units that are not completely stymied, but can interact a little bit. I think that's a very interesting approach. Because again, it gives you that, like, well, your army is doing something. It's just not doing what you want. Which is, I think, the core mechanic. Yeah. It does allow you to sort of potentially get out of some rough spots where you're like, oh, well, at least my cavalry can still move. Get the hell out of there, guys. But that's I think okay. Because I think that the core of the actual morale feeling you want is your army is not responding to you, not necessarily your army is frozen. You know, Pikeman.exe has crashed. So I think that's potentially a very good system, and you know, one the designer came up with, which is probably promising.
I mean, also though, the difference is that game has a total of 7 different units versus, you know, however many there are in Pikeman's Lament.
Yeah, and I think for that there's also, I don't think most armies will end up having access or wanting all 7. But yeah. There is another question with playing big Pikemans, which at that point, should you just play a proper pike and shot game?
I say yes. That's because I like the Rick Priestley Warlord systems of like Hail Caesar, Pike and Shot, Black Powder.
Yeah,
I really like them. So I say, if you want to play those big games, play those. Play them in those rules. Play them in the rules that are built for that thing. Like my Pikeman's Lament Force for 30 Years War is designed so that I can field it in Pike and Shot on movement trays.
Yeah, I sort of, as I was writing up the how to do the multiple detachments thing, I was like, okay, so cool. I've just rewritten the Pike and Shot rules for sort of command and control. And so I think there is an argument now with low points value games of Pike and Shot, you get into a sort of similar problem with your army freezing and not doing anything. Ask me how I know.
However, they did actually recently change that in the 2nd edition of Hail Caesar by adding in rules for playing single brigade games, which essentially breaks down to you fail that, they don't do anything, but you can still issue orders to all the other units.
And so I think that there's a lot to be said for if you've gotten past what feels like a credible amount to play with Pikeman's Lament, Pike and Shot's sitting right there, and I don't know that the system is so good as to not have it worth it to just do Pike and Shot instead, if that's the size of game you want to play. Because again, as Calvin mentioned, the units are pretty compatible. Like, movement trays are magic and can fix all sorts of problems. If you're doing it at the same scale, the units are very similar. So like they translate pretty easily to each other in a way where I think the actual answer, having us just spent an agonizing amount of time talking about playing big Pikeman's games, is hear me out, just play Pike and Shot.
Yeah. But I understand also if you go, I want to play Pikeman's Lament. It's like, go for it. More power to you. We can't stop you.
We can't stop you. We will not come to your house and impound your models.
But, So, at the end here, I figure we're going to talk about what our campaign has looked like, because we've alluded to it throughout the entire thing. And the answer is, there's not a lot of structure to it. It's literally just, when we play games, we're playing games with the same person on each side, and, like, continuing their story throughout things, which is how we get things like Ivan and Svetlana.
Yeah.
And these stupid little things that happen throughout the games.
Or Captain Skarsgård's insane desire to apparently die on the battlefield, because he is wounded nearly every game.
I mean, he's gotten nearly killed in duels twice now. I think each time we've tried to do a duel, he's
lost both duels and nearly gotten killed. I have rolled on that stupid officer wounded table at least 5 times.
And each time he rolled the same thing.
And each time he's been carried away by his men who love him dearly. And so that is sort of the emergent thing, is like that Captain Skarsgård is the old man of this unit, and that his men look up to him and respect him, and like that, yes, like they will make sure that if he's wounded, he's carried off the field, etc. But really what it is, and you could make, I think, a much more structured campaign where you say, okay, we're doing X, there's, I think it's 10 missions. See, I can count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, you could do 10 missions and be like, okay, we're doing, mission, the morning assault mission, and then this other mission, etc., etc. But we've just been doing it randomly. And so the narrative that comes from that is, that there's these two sort of minor officers who are entrusted to the sort of advanced forces of presumably a larger army, who have encountered each other repeatedly, sort of have built up a rivalry and have, fought in different aspects, and both have won and lost. So, for example, at some point, we played Storm the Redoubt, which is one where you have to assault a sort of a fixed defensive position. That one was, I was saying that the Imperial troops had sort of built up a small fortification at a road crossing to try to impede the advancing Swedish army. My guys came in and cleared them out. At some point we captured somebody. Calvin proceeded to immediately get them back in probably the worst game.
Stomp the crap out of you the entire way.
Yeah, and probably the worst game I've played so far. That tends to be the thing. I do better in open battles. Calvin does better when army composition gets weird. I, for example, did at one point force a river crossing at great cost to my own dudes.
That one was a bloodbath.
That one was just a bloodbath. There was a bridge that I think ground down 3 cavalry units. Just a disgusting bridge at this point. We had one mission, foraging at a village, where we literally did not fight each other, except Svetlana killed one cavalryman. Because essentially...
Yeah, Svetlana decided to shoot.
Yes, because essentially we both looted the other side of a village. And then the way it worked was like, hey, it is actually better for me to just run off the board than it is to fight you. And Calvin was like, oh, that's true for me too. I tried to charge one of his units with cavalry. It failed. Calvin fired his cannon for once, and it killed a cavalryman. And then everyone was like, all right, that was fun. Let's go drink whatever we just stole. So the campaign is a very loose campaign. It's not... and this is sort of the gist of this podcast is we're not trying to create a particular battle. This is not, the outskirts of Ravensburg in, 1634. This is just a place.
We're not doing Lutzen. We're not...
Yeah, somewhere in probably Germany, some tired and miserable dudes are trying to kill each other. And so it does make for a very loose campaign, but I think one for a lot of fun, sort of emergent gameplay. And so, that's our campaign. We're both up to captains. Mine, I think, because I've had slightly more battlefield successes. Yours, because you don't blow special orders. And so, I think we're both... We've both been having fun. It's nice to sort of link them together. It's nice to have a particular character. As I mentioned, if Captain Skarsgård catches a bullet or a sword, I'm going to be super sad. And then his son is going to take over. So you've got a lot of stuff like that. I think it's fun for a campaign, and I think that does really put together the feel for how you wanted to do something. I think you could absolutely link 3 or 4 of these together and have that be the kickoff to a campaign that then spills over into a game like Pike and Shot, where
where it's like each of your captains has done a thing.
So we have made it, okay, so we cleared out the redoubt and did some foraging, but failed the river crossing. Means that okay, so the terrain for the first game should probably involve you trying to force that river crossing again. And
it's a really great level of game to just mess around. If you want to do I don't know, I've never painted Landsnacks before, let's try it out. You can paint 50 of them even if they're kind of weird looking.
All right, so to close this out, Calvin, I believe you have an announcement to make.
So because of my streaming and my wonderful times doing everyone supporting me while I'm doing that, people unlocked a live episode of the podcast that we're going to do, which is going to include me and Eric taking questions both live and ones that we're going to request in a Google form that you're going to see in the description that I'm going to have to make and send a link to Eric to make work. Date to be determined. We'll probably announce it with like, you know, a quick announcement on here. But it will probably be sometime in the next couple months, whenever Eric ends up being less busy.
Yeah, as I have put it, my time of being not at home is coming to a middle. So I still have a couple business trips that I need to take care of. But we should be more available than we have been recently. So yeah, we will keep you informed about that. If you want to keep tabs on us, we have a presence on Twitter still, as long as the Hateful Bird site continues to exist. I'm on there as @VarianceHammer, and then we have an official one for the podcast, which is
Plastic Pressgang Pod.
All right.
Or Plastic Press Pod, I think.
Yeah.
It's something. You can find us.
I am also on Blue Sky at @VarianceHammer, and I tend to mirror my posts on those two sites. So yeah, keep a lookout for that, and we will send more information when we get a little bit closer.
Yeah, and of course, our lovely editor is Ari Shella, which you can find on Twitter under that handle. Our art is done by the amazingly talented Space Art Punk, which you can also find on Twitter and Twitch with that handle. And you can find me as well on Twitter as Rush's Jazz and Math. I have a Blue Sky. I don't remember what the handle is off the top of my head. I'll eventually fill it out into something. And you can find me on Twitch on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at Nevermore Painting.
And then if you want to send us questions, comments, feedback, etc., we also have an email address. It's plasticpressgang@gmail.com. And then also I post these, admittedly with a bit of delay, onto YouTube. On the Variance Hammer channel, we have a dedicated podcast playlist for it. So you can also leave a comment there, like, subscribe, the whole usual thing. So yeah, I think that's it for us.
Yeah, hopefully we're a little bit more on time with the next episode.
We're going to try.
All right, y'all have a good time. Bye-bye.